There used to be a voice in America that almost everyone knew, but almost nobody knew by name. You lifted a heavy receiver, held it to your ear, and before there was a dial tone, before buttons, before menus, before a recorded voice told you to listen carefully because the options had changed, a woman answered with 2 words, "Number, please." If you're over 65, there is a good chance that voice still lives somewhere in your memory. Maybe you remember your mother speaking to the operator as if she were a neighbor. Maybe your family had a party line, and you knew your own ring before you knew your own telephone number. Maybe you remember being told not to listen when the other family was talking, and maybe you remember doing it anyway. Some of you watching did more than talk to an operator. Some of you were operators, or your mother was, or your aunt, or the girl you later married worked at the telephone office before the wedding. Hold on to one name as we go. The operator's name, if you remember it. The town, the exchange, the ring pattern your family answered. Because this story ends in 1983, not 1933, in a living room in Maine, where one of the last hand-connected telephone systems in America was still answering crank calls while the rest of the country watched MTV and bought home computers. To understand how America got from "number, please" to that final quiet switchboard, we have to begin with the telephone company's first idea for the job: teenage boys. When telephone exchanges opened in the late 1870s, the companies staffed them much as telegraph offices had been staffed. Boys sat at the boards and connected subscribers. On paper, it made sense. In practice, the complaints came quickly. The boys argued with customers, joked on the lines, played pranks, and treated subscribers with the kind of patience 15-year-old boys are famous for not having. Imagine paying for access to the newest miracle in human communication, lifting the receiver, and having a teenager on the other end act as though you had interrupted him. So in Boston, on September 1st, 1878, a company connected to Alexander Graham Bell's telephone network tried something else. They hired a young woman named Emma Nutt. She is remembered as the first woman to work as a commercial telephone operator. A few hours later, her sister Stella joined her. The first 2 female telephone operators were sisters, sitting at the beginning of a job that would eventually become one of the most familiar occupations for American women. Emma was calm, precise, and patient. Customers preferred the new manner on the line, and telephone companies noticed. The boys disappeared from the boards. Women took their place. For generations after that, the first human voice many Americans heard when they picked up a telephone was female. The telephone company wanted clarity, discipline, and politeness. Operators were trained in approved phrases. Their voices were tested. Their work was monitored. Bell Advertising later celebrated the voice with a smile, but behind that smile was a job run with remarkable precision. Look closely at an old photograph of a switchboard room. Do not look at the dresses or the hairstyles first. Look at the board. A wall of brass-rimmed jacks rises in front of each operator. Small signal lights mark subscribers calling in. Rows of cords hang in pairs. When you lifted your receiver, or when a rural subscriber turned the crank on a wall telephone, a signal appeared. The operator plugged one cord into your jack and came onto the line. "Number, please." You gave her the number. She found the correct jack, sometimes high above eye level, sometimes several feet to one side. She plugged in the second cord, rang the other telephone, watched the signals, and waited for both parties to hang up. Then she pulled the cords and took the next call. In a busy exchange, calls could arrive one after another without pause. The women at those boards moved their hands like musicians who had memorized an instrument nobody else could play. Now imagine the sounds. Bells, keys, cords sliding over the board, supervisors walking behind the stools. Dozens of women speaking in the same calm professional register while hundreds of private lives arrive through their headsets. A doctor, a grocery store, a husband at work, a sister across town, a hotel desk, the train station, a funeral home, a young man asking for a young woman and trying very hard to sound as though her father would approve. Every call was physical. Somebody's hand made the connection. A wire from one home entered the board, and a woman joined it to another wire. For a few seconds, she stood between 2 people who wanted to reach each other. Then she disappeared from the conversation and waited for the next light. In the big cities, operators could disappear into rows of identical boards. In a small town, it was different. The operator might live 3 streets away. She might attend your church. Her brother might work with your father. Her children might sit behind yours at school. She knew the doctor's number without looking. She knew the sheriff was probably at the diner at noon. She knew which store stayed open after 6. Sometimes she knew your voice before you gave your name. That is the part younger people have trouble understanding. The operator was not customer service. She was part of the town. When you picked up the telephone, you were not entering a national system first. You were reaching a person nearby who understood the geography, the families, and the habits of the community. That knowledge became especially important when something went wrong. Today, an emergency has a number that feels almost permanent, 911. But the first 911 call in the United States was not placed until February 1968 in Haleyville, Alabama. By then, Americans had television sets in their living rooms. Jet airliners crossed the country, and men were preparing to walk on the moon. Yet for most of the telephone's earlier history, there was no single emergency number that worked across the country. So what did you do when your father collapsed? What did you do when a barn caught fire, when a child was injured, when a car went off the road, when an old woman living alone suddenly could not breathe? In many communities, you called the operator. You lifted the receiver or turned the crank, and a woman answered. Sometimes you did not even know who you needed. She did. She could find the doctor. She could ring the sheriff. She could connect the fire station or alert the people who knew how to sound the town's alarm. In rural communities, where volunteer firefighters might be spread across farms and small businesses, the telephone exchange became part of the emergency system. A frightened child did not need to remember a department number. The child needed to speak clearly enough for the operator to understand that something was wrong. There are old accounts of operators staying at their boards through floods, storms, and fires, continuing to connect calls while the communities around them were in danger. The Bell system created the Vail Medal to honor extraordinary public service by employees, and many of the stories associated with telephone service involved people who kept communications alive when leaving would have been safer. Think about the decision hidden inside that job. Water is rising. Smoke is getting closer. People are being told to leave. Yet the board in front of you continues to light. Every lamp is somebody trying to reach somebody else. If you walk away, the town does not simply lose convenience. It loses a nervous system. So you stay for one more call, then another, then another. The telephone operator is often remembered as a pleasant voice from an old commercial. But sometimes she was the person awake while everyone else was panicking. She was the person who knew where the doctor had gone because she had connected his last call. She was the person who could hear from a caller's breathing that this was not an ordinary request. She was the person who had to remain calm because the voice on the other end was not calm at all. Everyone knew the voice, yet history kept surprisingly few names. That is the operator's story in miniature. Millions of Americans trusted women whose faces they never saw and whose names rarely entered history books. Then, in 1917, the United States went to war and suddenly discovered just how valuable their skill really was. The First World War had become a war of wires as much as roads and railways. Artillery, headquarters, supplies, and battlefield orders depended on communication. General John Pershing's forces in France needed trained telephone operators, and they needed people who could work rapidly in English and French. The United States already had them. They were sitting at switchboards. The Army recruited experienced women operators, especially those with French language skills, for the Signal Corps. Newspapers called them the Hello Girls. They trained, wore uniforms, lived under military discipline, and crossed the Atlantic to work military switchboards in France. More than 200 were trained for overseas service. These were women whose civilian jobs had taught them to connect calls quickly, accurately, and without panic. One of the best known was Grace Banker, a chief operator who served during the Great Offensives of 1918. The work was not ceremonial. Calls carried military information. Speed mattered. Accuracy mattered. The women worked with the sounds of war close enough to remind them that a wrong connection could be more than an inconvenience. There is a strange lesson in that. Telephone companies had first hired women because executives believed customers would prefer a patient female voice. Decades later, the job had produced highly trained communication specialists. When the Army needed speed and discipline on complex boards, it turned to women who had already spent years doing exactly that work. Then the war ended, and the women returned home expecting the country to recognize what they had done. Instead, the government treated them as civilians rather than soldiers. Despite uniforms, overseas service, and military orders, they were denied the veteran recognition they believed their service deserved. They did not let the matter disappear. The Hello Girls organized, petitioned, wrote letters, kept records, and continued asking. Years passed, then decades. It was not until 1977 that they finally received recognition as veterans. By then, only a fraction of the women who had served were still alive. Imagine waiting almost 60 years for a country to say, yes, you were there. Yes, you served. Yes, it counted. The women who had spent their lives connecting other people spent decades trying to connect their own service to the official record. Back home, however, another change had already begun. It was round, numbered, and attached to the front of a telephone. The dial. I want older viewers to pause here and remember the first telephone number they ever learned. Some of you may have forgotten where you left your glasses this morning, yet you can still recite a number from 1957 without hesitation. Those numbers settled deep in the memory. But before direct dialing reached your town, you did not need to move a dial at all. You picked up and spoke to a person. Automatic switching did not take over America overnight. It moved exchange by exchange, city by city, town by town. Some places converted early. Rural communities could hold on to manual service for decades. The telephone industry even had a word for the exact moment a community changed systems: the cutover. A cutover could become a local event. The newspaper wrote about it. Officials might place a ceremonial first dialed call. Telephone company workers prepared equipment for months. Then, often at a carefully chosen hour, the old manual board stopped handling local calls and the new switching equipment took over. The operator who had connected the town for years suddenly heard something new in the system: people connecting themselves. There was one practical problem. People had to be taught how to dial. That sounds ridiculous until you remember that millions of adults had never needed to touch a dial. Why would they know? Their telephone worked perfectly well without one. The phone company made instructional films and demonstrations showing people how to put a finger in the correct hole, turn the wheel all the way to the finger stop, remove the finger, and let the dial return by itself. Do not push it back. Let it return. Some of the women whose jobs were disappearing helped teach customers to use the system that was replacing them. Sit with that image for a moment. A woman who had connected a town's calls for 20 years showing a housewife how to turn the dial so the housewife would no longer need her. There is no villain in that scene. Direct dialing was faster. It offered more privacy. A modern telephone network could not depend forever on a person physically connecting every ordinary call. People wanted the new service. Progress solved real problems. But the fact that progress is useful does not mean it is free. And the operator remained in the telephone for a long time after the local switchboard disappeared. Long distance still needed assistance. Collect calls, person-to-person calls, information, special services. You could dial 0 and reach a human being. For older Americans, the operator continued to exist somewhere inside the system even when you no longer heard "number, please" every time you lifted the receiver. Then there were party lines. Some of you smiled before I finished the sentence. For younger viewers, imagine several families sharing one telephone line. Your home had a ring pattern, maybe 2 short rings, maybe one long and one short. Another family had a different pattern. When the telephone rang, you listened before you answered. You knew whether the call belonged to your house. When another family's pattern rang, you were supposed to ignore it. Supposed to. There are viewers here who became experts at lifting a receiver without making the smallest sound. Slowly, carefully, palm over the mouthpiece. Do not breathe too loudly. And suddenly you knew more about the neighbors than anyone had intended to tell you. Everybody says they did not listen. Everybody also has a party line story. That tells you something. The operator knew the party lines and the ring patterns. She also knew the arguments they caused. A line could be tied up by one household. A neighbor could complain that somebody was always listening. Rural courtship took place with the possibility that an aunt 3 farms away might be holding a receiver against her ear. Privacy was a technical limitation, but it also became a matter of manners. The party line was a social network made of copper wire, except the network might be 6 families, 1 operator, and your grandmother. News moved through it. Gossip moved even faster. People learned what not to say on the telephone. Serious arguments waited until you were face to face. Families developed codes. Children learned early that the telephone could carry a voice farther than the kitchen, but not necessarily beyond the neighborhood. And if party lines created their own etiquette, long distance created its own household economics. A long-distance call cost real money. By the minute, everyone in the house knew it. When somebody shouted, "It's long distance," the mood changed. You did not wander into another room looking for a pencil. You did not spend 10 minutes describing the weather. You talked. Children were briefed before taking the receiver. Say hello to grandma. Tell her thank you. Do not fool around. Your mother might stand nearby, making a winding motion with one hand, which meant finish. Somewhere in the conversation, a grandmother would begin shouting into the receiver on the theory that Chicago was far away and her voice needed extra help getting there. Then there was the person-to-person call. An operator placed the call for a specific person, and the charge applied when that person came to the telephone. American families looked at that arrangement and discovered a loophole almost immediately. A son drove to another city. His mother wanted to know he had arrived safely, but a full long-distance conversation cost money. So the son placed a person-to-person call for himself. The operator rang his mother's house and asked for him. His mother said, truthfully, "I'm sorry, he isn't here." The call ended. No conversation, no charge. And his mother knew he had arrived because he had just asked for himself from the city he was supposed to reach. The operators knew. Of course they knew. They heard versions of that trick again and again. The telephone company had rules. American families had creativity. And somewhere between the two sat a woman with a headset who had probably figured out the entire code before the family finished inventing it. These are the parts of history that vanish first. Not the dates, not the company names, the little tricks. The way your mother looked at you when the long-distance clock was running. The way you lifted a party line receiver. The operator's tone when she already knew exactly why you were calling. By the 1960s and 1970s, most ordinary calls were increasingly automatic, but operators still handled the calls that did not fit neatly into the new system. You dialed 0. A person answered. For decades, the great army of switchboard operators did not disappear in a single year. It thinned. One exchange closed. Another cut over. A room of women retired, transferred, or took new jobs inside the telephone company. And the old manual systems kept not quite disappearing, until the trail reached Bryant Pond, Maine. Listen carefully to the year. 1983, not 1933. 1983. The space shuttle was flying. Michael Jackson was on MTV. Pac-Man had already become an American obsession. Home computers were beginning to appear in spare bedrooms. And in a village in western Maine, people were still using hand-crank telephones with no dial and no push buttons. You turned the crank. A signal reached the exchange. A human being answered. The Bryant Pond Telephone Company was operated by Eldon and Barbara Hathaway. The switchboard sat in their home. For 31 years, the Hathaways helped run the town's telephone system from that house. By the end, the system served 481 customers. Try to imagine what it means to live inside a telephone exchange. Breakfast near the switchboard. Supper near the switchboard. Christmas morning with the board nearby. A call in the middle of the night because somebody's child had a fever. A neighbor trying to reach family. A line problem during bad weather. The telephone company was not down the street. The telephone company was in the living room. The Hathaway children grew up around cords and jacks. Calls came at all hours. Somebody in that house answered because somebody had to. In most of America, technology had moved the operator farther away. In Bryant Pond, the person on the line was still a neighbor. By the early 1980s, Bryant Pond had become famous. Reporters came to see the last hand-crank telephone exchange. Television crews filmed wooden wall phones still being used in ordinary homes. Americans who had already lived through rotary dialing and push-button phones watched in amazement as people in Maine turned a crank and waited for a familiar voice. Modernization was coming, and some residents did not want it. They were not confused about technology. They understood dialing. They understood that automatic systems were faster and more efficient. What they also understood was the other side of the bargain. The woman who answered knew your voice. The family operating the board knew the community. The exchange was not only equipment, it was a relationship. The resistance produced a slogan so perfect I wish somebody had put it on a national monument. Don't yank the crank. A town in Maine, in the age of the space shuttle, organizing to save a hand-crank telephone system. Not because the crank was superior technology, because the person between the wires mattered to them. But infrastructure moves in one direction once a country commits to it. In October 1983, Bryant Pond converted to modern service. The manual switchboard went quiet. The crank system ended. Emma Nutt began in Boston in 1878. Bryant Pond ended in Maine in 1983. 105 years. A century-long relay from woman to woman, headset to headset, board to board. Millions upon millions of calls. Births announced. Doctors found. Fires reported. Teenagers overheard. Grandmothers called. Soldiers connected. Bad news delivered. Good news carried across towns and across oceans. Then the lights on the board went dark. The Bryant Pond switchboard was preserved. It belongs to history now. The area even remembers the old system with a giant crank telephone monument. You can save the board. You can save the cords. You can save the jacks. You can put the headset behind glass. But this story is different from most stories on this channel. An old jukebox can be restored. A radio can be recapped. A typewriter can be cleaned and adjusted. A 70-year-old rotary telephone can sit in a basement for decades and ring again when the right person reconnects it. Machines wait. Sometimes they wait 50 years for somebody who remembers how they work. The telephone operator cannot be restored because the switchboard was never the whole machine. She was part of it. The real system included the woman who recognized your voice. The woman who knew the doctor was not home because she had just connected him somewhere else. The woman who noticed a child sounded frightened. The woman who understood that an elderly subscriber sometimes called with a line problem that was not entirely a line problem. The woman who stayed at the board when the weather turned bad. We replaced her with technology that was faster, more private, and capable of handling a country with hundreds of millions of people. I am not going to pretend the old system was perfect. Operators could listen. Party lines had little privacy. Calls were misconnected. Manual boards could not serve the scale of modern America. Progress solved real problems. But people make a mistake when they assume that if the new system does the main job better, nothing valuable was lost. The automatic exchange connected the number. The operator sometimes connected the person. There is a difference. Once, in this country, something terrible could happen at 2 in the morning, and you could pick up a telephone or turn a crank. Maybe the lights were out. Maybe your father had collapsed. Maybe there was smoke outside. Maybe you were 8 years old and had never made a telephone call alone. A voice answered. Number, please. You might not know the number. You might not even know exactly who you needed. But somebody was there. Not a menu. Not hold music. Not a screen asking you to describe your problem in a few words. A person who knew the town, knew the lines, and was listening. Whatever had happened, however bad the night was, for those first few seconds you were no longer completely alone with it. That is the part no museum can restore. The boards are still here. The cords are still here. The telephones are still here. The voice is gone. And if you remember her, really remember her, tell us the town. Tell us the exchange. Tell us her name, if you still have it. Because everyone once knew the voice. Maybe it is time we remembered the women. Number, please. No machine has ever made those two words mean quite the same thing.